Imagine waking up in minus 30 degrees, surrounded by the mangled metal of a plane crash, with no food, no gear, and the crushing realization that the world has stopped looking for you. This isn't a horror movie. It's a 72-day nightmare of the Society of the Snow. A story not just of survival, but of a sacred pact that pushed the boundaries of human morality. 22-year-old Nando Parrado woke up in a deep black hole. He thought he was dead. When his eyes finally adjusted to the freezing, dust-filled air, he found himself trapped inside the mangled fuselage of a Fairchild FH227D. He was stranded at an elevation of 11,710 feet. The temperature outside was 30 degrees below zero. He and his teammates from a Uruguayan rugby club were dressed only in light street clothes and dress shoes. They had zero winter equipment. Beside him, the reality of the crash set in. His best friend, Panchito, was dead. His mother, Eugenia, was dead. And a few feet away, his younger sister, Susie, lay critically injured on the floor, unable to move. In a matter of seconds, 45 passengers had been violently ripped from modern civilization and dropped into a completely hostile vacuum. The standard rules of human survival no longer applied. Looking at this topographical map, you can trace Flight 571's intended path. A U-shaped routing south to clear the Andes through a lower pass. But the inexperienced co-pilot misread his instruments, believing he had already passed the waypoint of Curicó. He turned north prematurely, steering the plane directly into the highest peaks of the mountain range. The aircraft clipped a ridge at 220 miles per hour, instantly shredding its wings and tail. The remaining fuselage tobogganed down a steep glacier before colliding with a massive snowbank. It came to a halt inside a high-altitude cirque, a bowl-like geological structure that trapped them deep within what would later be named the Valley of Tears. Even days into the ordeal, survivor Roy Harley managed to repair a small transistor radio. The group huddled around it, listening to the static, only to hear a news broadcast announce that the official search operation had been permanently called off. The psychological gravity of that broadcast was crushing. The outside world had given them up for dead. Nobody was coming for them, forcing the survivors into a state of absolute total self-reliance. When we think of a young man stranded in isolation, we often default to William Golding's novel, Lord of the Flies, expecting humans left to their own devices to devolve into chaos and collective failure. But the reality on the mountain directly contradicts that fiction. The original hierarchy quickly collapsed when the rugby team's captain was overwhelmed by his leadership role. In its place, a more adaptive, consensual government emerged, led by the older cousins in the group who focused entirely on pragmatic problem solving. They immediately divided the labor based on individual strength. 2 medical students triaged the wounded and rigged hammocks for broken legs. Others took on the work of melting snow on aluminum sheets for drinking water or weaving snowshoes from seat cushions. Despite their severe emaciation and the freezing conditions, they maintained a strict daily routine. Every person had a specific role to play, creating a highly disciplined community inside the wreckage of the cabin. The Society of the Snow functioned as a self-sustaining organism. By anchoring themselves to a collective purpose, they created a barrier against the mountain's hostility that individual willpower alone could never have maintained. But their biology was working against them. The few rations scavenged from the plane, some chocolate, dates, and wine, ran out in just a week. At that altitude, their bodies were burning immense calories to stay warm, effectively consuming their own muscle mass to survive. Facing starvation, they arrived at a horrifying conclusion. Preserved in the snow outside the fuselage were the bodies of their friends and family members. As devout Roman Catholics, the thought of consuming human flesh triggered intense moral and religious anger. To cross this extreme psychological boundary, they framed their decision as a sacred pact of mutual love. They explicitly aligned the consumption of their bodies with Holy Communion. When global newspapers eventually splashed the word cannibalism across their front pages, they missed the profound spiritual sacrifice that actually took place. Then, on the 16th day, the environment struck again. While the survivors were resting inside the cabin, a massive avalanche roared down the mountain. A suffocating wall of white snow violently engulfed the fuselage, killing 8 more people instantly. The aftermath was a nightmare of claustrophobia. The remaining survivors were trapped beneath the snow for days, breathing through a single hole punched through the roof with a metal pole. They waited out the blizzard, lying shoulder to shoulder with the bodies of their newly deceased friends. The avalanche shattered their remaining illusions of safety. They realized the mountain was actively trying to kill them, and the fuselage was not a safe haven. Passive survival was no longer an option. Their only way out was to walk. Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa prepared for a 10-day, 38-mile trek across the Andes, with 0 mountaineering gear, no ropes, and severe altitude sickness. The trek required a perfect psychological symbiosis. Nando possessed a relentless, almost obsessive drive to keep pushing forward at all costs. Roberto provided the strategic caution, forcing Nando to rest and pace himself so they didn't freeze or burn out completely. On the 3rd day, Nando reached the summit of Mount Sella. He expected to look down and see the green valleys of Chile. Instead, the horizon offered only an endless, sprawling expanse of hostile, snow-capped peaks. They were 80 miles further into the mountains than the co-pilot had claimed. Despite the crushing disappointment, Nando refused to retreat. They descended the western face of the mountain, hiking for 7 more grueling days as the snow slowly gave way to a river valley. Finally, across a rushing river, they spotted a man on horseback, a Chilean arriero. To survive the geography of the Andes, they had to override their basic human instincts for self-preservation. Progress meant accepting death as a precondition, moving forward only once they had made peace with the likelihood of never returning. After 72 days on the glacier, the silence of the Valley of Tears was broken by the sound of rotors. 2 Chilean Air Force helicopters navigated the jagged peaks, pulling the 14 remaining survivors off the mountain. The physical contrast was jarring. The survivors were pulled from a brutal, primitive existence and dropped into sterile hospital wards. They had lost nearly half their body weight, arriving as skeletal figures suffering from scurvy, frostbite, and severe dehydration. Their final hurdle was facing a horrified global press. Initial public reaction to their survival methods was harsh, but the narrative shifted to awe once the survivors held a press conference and explained the sacred pact they made to save one another. In 72 days, these young men faced starvation, freezing temperatures, and avalanches. Stripped of every modern comfort, they made it out not by descending into anarchy, but by relying completely on each other. The miracle of the Andes stands as proof that in the harshest conditions imaginable, human beings survive through radical empathy and unimaginable sacrifice.